area which is threatened to be the influence of Russia, and this has to be contained. And the Serbians are not to be pro-Russian by blood relation, etc., by being Orthodox Christian, etc. Secondly, the governments in the are not, I reject strongly calling them Christian government. There are Christian people in these governments. They are secular governments. And for secular ideology, where the world is essentially material and politics to be materialistic, it's a very reasonable and rational thought that instead of, for example, dumping bodies for the worms to be eaten, that you put them in gas furnaces and turn maybe the body fat into soap. This is more practical and making good sense as a rationalist, a strict secular rationalist. So all these values which he's addressing coming from Christianity or Islam and Judaism or some kind of religious background, I know that atheists are trying to argue for some values on atheist ground, but we're not going into philosophy of ethics now. So the problem is there. We are not dealing with Christian government, with viciously secular governments in the West. The American government is maybe the most religious in that sense because the Constitution is based on certain principles, and it says one nation under God and so on. That's the only religious or spiritual aspect of it. The rest is purely secular, no doubt about that. European government, the French government is viciously secular. It's viciously secular, there's no doubt about that. So there is not Christian intervening there, it's secular government for the secular interest mostly. And they have the one who having Christian feeling or some secular background expressed like Clinton their fear. That's number one, so in Kosovo. But the clash of civilization, what will really bring some kind of balance and tranquility is not so-called moderates or non-moderates. It's really people who fundamentally believe in these values and want to enforce it. The one who are willing to overcome Machiavellian politics and go really, principle-oriented politics, which have been absent in the recent 3-4 centuries in the world, in Europe specifically. It's only Machiavellian and purely interest politics. No ideology or no moral principles are predominant anywhere because it's bad for money, bad for earning, and bad for imperialistic designs. So I suggest, again, scrap all these moral nonsense and let us go to the reality. The reality of history, for example, speaking of example of history, there was a fundamentalistic, so-called fundamentalistic extreme Islamic state in the Khilafat in the Arab countries and around the Middle East, established by the Prophet and the companions, etc., over centuries. And there was a Christian government in Ethiopia, in Abyssinia. For historic reasons, which are very lucky, Muslims found the refuge in the early phases of Meccan time in Ethiopia, and they got protection. That's what appreciated by them, and the ruler of Ethiopia became secretly a Muslim. Most likely Islamic tradition say he was a Muslim. Independent of that, the one after him was definitely a Muslim, but he was wise enough to recognize he has no interest to confront the Islamic State or oppress the Muslim in his domain. So there was peace and tranquility for 7 centuries. Not even one single soldier of the Muslim domain went to Abyssinia, Ethiopia, nor vice versa. Only when the Abyssinian government later, in the Middle Ages, so-called Middle Ages, started oppressing Muslims, the Horn of Africa started split and the problems started developing, and they are mounting and developing. So this model is old, has nothing to do with Western secularism or the philosophy of Aristotle or Plato. It can be done provided everyone respect his limit. Islamic State said, as long as the Muslim in your domain are respected, they are not oppressed, they have their own law and order in family affairs, in business affairs. You're not oppressing them. You're not going to tell them, this hijab I don't like, you make it smaller. You don't interfere in things which are none of your business. You don't interfere in our businesses, and the Christians are protected. They have their churches, they have crosses, they have their processions in the streets, in Damascus, and everyone is fine and nice. The moment you come with arms, you will see armed force against you. This is the simple principle of cooperation. Anything else will not work.
Well, let me go back to Alex with this. Do you think that Western leaders will take seriously Osama bin Laden's demand for the West to get out of Muslim lands?
No, I think Western foreign policy should be judged by its public through elections and not blackmailed via a terrorist acting outside and trying to influence elections or foreign policy through.
And what about the people in those Muslim lands? Who is their voice?
Well, in the sense that for those lands that have democracies, such as Iraq, such as Afghanistan, then their elected governments are their voices. So, for instance, in Iraq, the presence of coalition troops is supported by a UN mandate.
Alex, how can there be democracies when they have occupying armies from other countries in their land? It seems
there's this rather, actually, I think, a very strange idea an intellectual idea that you can't produce democracy after a conflict. So that's not actually true. It happened in Germany, it happened in Japan. Very successful democracies emerged, and actually quite often democracies that emerge after a conflict, it's a natural historical process.
But
I think, of course, eventually the troops will have to go, but only once the security and the government's able to control its own security. And sadly, in Iraq and Afghanistan, that isn't the case, and that's why their own governments are saying we want the troops to stay.
So what do you think the whole purpose of this recent tape is?
It's I guess, to try and show that bin Laden's still alive. There's obviously constant rumours that he's dead, so it's a way of communicating with his supporters that he's still around as the spiritual leader of Al-Qaeda. It's also, I suppose, to try and influence the public, but I think on that second objective he's failed.
Do you think he's still alive, Dr. Helbawi? I mean, there are all sorts of rumours and counter-rumours.
Yes, I do believe
he's either alive or dead, so make your choice. So
no. I do believe he is still alive. And
Well, I recently asked
there is no doubt about that, but let me say to our brothers that first of all, clash of civilization theory is not related to Osama bin Laden and not related to anyone from the Arab world or Muslim world.
Samuel Huntington.
It came from Samuel Huntington and from America and from Harvard. Secondly, I would like to ask Alex, when did America become the only superpower and why?
When and why?
When and why?
Which is defeated by Afghanistan.
When and why?
Why? Well, I think because of the collapse of the Soviet Union. I mean,
who brought the Soviet Union to collapse?
Afghanistan.
Who?
Well, there were a whole range of factors.
Is this the reward of the Afghan people? Is this the reward of the Afghan people who made America the only superpower in the world to have this reward from America? Why you didn't think about that? And why think tanks don't consider such a matter?
Yeah, thinking it more
I do believe, I told Sayyaf and the Hikmat Yar and Burhan during the war, if you ask Americans to pay you $200 billion for your battle, they will do that. They didn't expect that. But I'm sure
the Americans
if they asked it, they would have done
against
that.
the Soviet Union. I don't think it's the right policy. But the
No, this is not the reward. This is ingratefulness. Ingratefulness not only from the politicians or the governments, but it's also ingratitude from the public in the West, not to understand real issues and give the proper reward to the people.
So
Afghanistan liberated, the war in Afghanistan liberated the Soviet independent states, now in Turkmenistan and Tajikistan, and liberated other